I could take Mikla Bikurim for the top and just, let's say, a confession before we start. I erased and rewrote it and erased it and rewrote it and erased it. Maybe I'll erase this again, but let's just want to know, let's at least understand what we do know and what we don't know. Okay. HaMitzvah Hashtayim Ushloshim V'Echad. He shetzivonu lesaper tevosov yis'aleh or chasodov asher heitiv lonu. Okay. V'hitzilonu, I think, it's a part of what lesaper is. Is lesaper hatovish lesaper tevosov yis'aleh asher heitiv lonu. And that's a colon, and that's Ibn Tibin in Kapach. It's Chasod of Yis'ala Oleinu. Is then this L'chere Asipo Tevosav, or it's not a colon, and it refers to the first part of the Parsha Bikurim. Higati hayoim l'Hashem Elokecho, ki vosi al ha'oretz asher nishba Hashem la'avoseinu l'oses lanu. And this is chasodav ashis'aleh or sheheitiv lanu. Then vitzilonu then certainly is a colon, and it's umaschil be'inyan Yaakov Avinu. That's Arami Ovid. Okay. Now we understand. We don't know what the Hitzilon or Arami Ovid, but it doesn't say Vayel Mitzrayim unless that itself is that solo, because he wanted to destroy him, kill him, whatever. U'Misayim Ba'avodas HaMitzrayim. This in Kapach Vitzilon u'Maschil be'in Yaakov Avinu U'Misayim Ba'avodas HaMitzrayim That's even Tivin V'Nosam Lanu Oisanu. And in Kapach, there's no Messiah. V'hitzilosenu mereshes matzav Yaakov Avinu u'mishiba Mitzrayim v'inuyim lanu. So that l'chere is the first Higat Hayoim l'ses lanu as the Esaoretz, and then Asher Nishbal Avosenu, and then then was Arami Ovid Ovi, that is Yaakov Avinu, and then Vayreinu Osonu HaMitzrim Vayanunu Vayadnu Aleinu Avodah Kosher V'Yitzchak Al Hashem Elokei Avosenu Vayishma Hashem Es Kolenu V'Yaras Anyoenu V'Yasam Aleinu V'Yasachsenu V'Yitzchak Hashem Mitzrayim. That's Hitzilon. Okay, say that. Until this point, everything is fine. Okay? Then there's a word in Arabic, uschara, however you pronounce it, and I'll call zeh. So we have to ask ourselves what this word means and what the issues are. Schora is a word which the Rambam I found in Sefer HaMitzvos. He uses it 4 times, and I found it one time in Pirush Mishnayos. Okay. And let's just see what the word is. Just before we start, the general translation of the word is lahodos, to be thankful, okay? But Bloy, in his Judeo-Arabic dictionary, has another option of to laud or extol, or l'shabeach u'lahallel, okay? Ibn Tibin is very odd, because, or let's say, when it comes to in Shirish Tes, and over here he says l'shabchoi. In Mitzvah Yutes, where we're talking about the Mitzvah Birchas Hamazon, he says l'vochoi. No, he gets that from. We'll talk about it, Mitzvah Hashem. And the fourth time where it is the Mitzvah Tzraim, he says l'hoidos. So it's the same word, and you would assume that he's translating differently based on context, because there are various translations over here, but we have to understand if what he did we should do. Kapach translates them in all cases as l'hoidos, which is the general translation. Okay. Now, I think when it comes to Birchas Hamazon, we translate Levochoi, he basically is being influenced by the Minyan HaKotzer, Minyan Mitzvah HaKotzer. The Rambam writes, Levorch Achar Hamazon, Shenema V'Achalta V'Savota V'Achta. So since it's V'Achta, he uses this word, even though the word Brocha is not an interpretation, which Bloy assumes is a possibility. He assumes that since the Minyan HaKotzer goes like this, so he interprets it like this also. Okay, the same. I think over here that you should certainly translate like Kapach. The Ram uses this Arabic word in the Pirush Mishnah in Psachim, in Perek Dalet Mishnah Yud. And I think over there, that's the way you should translate it. Because he says, I'm leaving out to be just quoting the part that is relevant to us. Ki kamo sh'ani moide la'Hashem be'es ha'oichel shehimse lidova lohosir ravoini ul'achayosani ul'kaimani. So I would assume that the proper translation would be Hoda'ah. And that's what's happening. You're moide to Hashem. So I would assume he's explaining what Birchas Hamazon is, and that's his opinion there. And I assume that this is opinion over here. Okay. So that I think is okay. That I think is Hidah. And that probably might explain the Boch of V'noideh L'cha Hashem Elokeinu. You have to ask yourself, what's a Ve'rachto es Hashem Elokecha al oret ha'toivo? Okay, I'm not getting involved. Now, we discussed it in Mitzvah Tes, I think. In Mitzvah Aseh Mitzrayim, there Ibn Tibbon agrees that it's l'hoidos, and I would assume it's like that, because when you talk about when you're moide al chasodov, l'cheira, you're not mishabeach al chasodov, you're moide al chasodov. And that's the Rambam he says like this. He says, goes like this. In Kuf Nun Zayin, Hitch Divon of the Sapis is Mitzrayim, B'leil Chamisha Osa B'Nisan, V'chulei V'chol HaMyoyosef B'mayim V'yarach HaDvorim B'Agdolos Masha Osa Lonu Hashem, Mamasha Osa Imonu HaMitzrim, Me'ova V'chomos, V'eich Lochach Hashem Nikmoseinu Mehem, U'v'hidis Lo Yis'ale, Amashe Gomolonu Mechasodov, Yeh Yoysetov. So here I assume that it's l'hoidos. So, however, when it comes to Shirish Tes, and he's listening types of mitzvahs that are schora, so if everything is l'hoidos, then that's what he's talking about. The question, which mitzvah is referring to? So you'll have to know. However, when it comes to bikurim, I would assume, for example, Rapsadi Goin has also the same word schora in his Sefer HaMitzvos in Perek Aleph Amud 14. For achas esrei lehoidis loy al ateva asher nosan loch. V'zeis kegoyim bikurim, mikul bikurim. Go mikul bikurim. So if it's a heidah al teva, l'choyer assume that the translation is the general translation of hoida'ah. Now here, in mikul bikurim, it's very complicated. So the complication especially is he adds al kol zeh. We have no idea what he's talking about, but okay. Well, it's either l'shapchei al kol zeh or ulahides loy al kol zeh. So either, see, when you're talking about chasadov, so I assume that it's lahides. When you're talking about a hatzalah, you can assume it's a sheva from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, al the yot chazoko, v'zoy the tuya, and how, or maybe it's a hidah. We're not 100% clear of what this might be. Rav Sadi Goyen assumes that it's a hidah, but let's just try to understand it in context. Because he's talking about al kol zeh. So what's al kol zeh? Al kol zeh means I would assume that Tevosav Yis'ale Asher Heitiv Lanu V'hitzilanu U'maschil Be'inyan Yaakov Avinu U'Mesayim Ba'avodas Mitzrayim V'Enusam Oisanu. And then U'L'Shapcho Elohim Al Kol Zeh. Okay? So the problem is just a very simple question. You have to. This is not rocket science, okay? Not that I don't know how difficult it is, but whatever. When you read the parsha of Mikul Bikurim Arami Ovid Ovi, it basically is a story that he tells you. First of all, it's an introductory remark. He got Yayoy, okay, which the Ram seems to learn, or the Saper. He got to Lashon L'Saper, others interpret it differently. That means L'Saper, and then the Gadati continues, then Mitzrayim, and then right? So what does it mean in either interpretation? What are we referring to? If you're thanking God, you should find a word of thanks in the parasha. And you can understand maybe much better the Shapcha, you talk about Zoy and the Tuya, Godol, you go through the various things of Bikurim. So in the parasha of Bikurim, that would be very nice. In the Mikra Bikurim, however, you fall short under all interpretations. Al kol zeh. The Ram goes out of his way to explain that each one is being taken separately. And we don't understand what that is. So you can understand in a limited sense that the Shevach, the word Haidah, you don't know where it's coming from unless you interpret the word Higadati as Haidah, which there are Rishonim, like Rabban Chumash quoting, whatever it is, but you're not finding this in the Rambam, because the Rambam is saying L'Saper. And then the question is, you get the impression from reading this sentence that the Shapcha Elohidis Loi is a separate act, independent of the Sipur of the Chasadov and the Hatzalah from Arami Ovi, and the Hatzalah of Mitzrayim. We don't find such a thing unless you cut the pasuk of Yotzei Mitzrayim, B'yot Chazok, was only 2 years, but it still is not Al Kol Zeh. You don't understand the Al Kol Zeh. The only way that I can understand that there's an element, see, and also the interesting thing is the Parsha Bikurim, there's a clear precedent in the Rambam that it's Maschul Begenusu Messiah B'Shvach, because the Pshat in the Mishnah according to the Rambam, Umaschul Begenusu Messiah B'Hu Yijidosh Be'Parsha Rami Ovi, the Rambam Hilchos Chometz U'Matzah, that you see in Rami Ovi that it's Maschul Begenusu Messiah B'Shvach. So that could have been a very nice segue to learn that it's L'Shapchoi, as Ibn Tibbon does. However, you still at a loss to explain Al Kol Zeh. Now, that's the Rambam Perek Zayin Hilchos Chometz U'Matzah Halacha Dal B'Tzorach L'Haschil Genus B'Sayim L'Shevach Keitzad Maschil Modia V'Chulei V'Hu She'idrosh Merami Yovirovi Ad Shiur Kol HaParsha. There is a possibility, but you don't know if it has any meaning at all. You could interpret V'ato hine hevesi es reishes pri adomo asher nosati li Hashem v'inachtoi lifnei Hashem Elokecha. This is not clear that it's a hidah. It's a proclamation that it's Hakol Mimenu, and that you're not Kofri Toiva, but it's not a Hidah, because look at the Sifri, he got it to you in the Sifri, he got it to you, it says, V'yamalt Elov v'lo Kofri Toiva. V'yamalt Elov v'lo Kofri Toiva. I would have interpreted means that you're not being machish that it's from him, but you don't say explicitly that that you're thankful to him. You're just not. It's a negative. You're not v'lo kofi tova. You but v'lo kofi tova. That's a hidah of a thank you, or it's a proclamation that it's a kol mimenu. It's a shevach. Okay. Also, the question is, Pashtus is the mitzvahs mikro bikurim is through dibur. Va'ato hine hevesi es reishes pri adomo asher nosati l'Hashem Elokech Hashem v'inachtoi lifnei Hashem Elokecho. Okay. V'hinachto lifnei Hashem Elokecha is telling you what you should do. V'hinachto lifnei Hashem Elokecha v'ishtachavisa lifnei Hashem Elokecha. Okay? V'somachta b'chol ha'teiv asher nosan locho Hashem Elokecha leveisecha atov alev v'ager asher b'bekecha. So it is true. The Sifri says in Kisavoy, in Piska Shin Aleph, V'inachtoi lifnei Hashem Elokecha v'ishtachavilu l'Hashem Elokecha malamed shetu'unim hanocho shtei pomim achas b'shas kriya v'achas b'shas tishtachavo. So there's a separate V'inachtoi with that together with ishtachavo. V'samacht b'chol meni smochos. So I would have said that the Mikra Bikurim is over with when you say V'ato hine evesi es reishis pri adomo asher nosati li Hashem then it's over. V'nachta lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'shtachavos is afterwards. It's certain things to do afterwards. And that's the smachos, b'chol minei smachos, b'chol teiv, b'chol ateiv, ze Shiur. Okay, so now, when you have more than this, okay? So we don't know, unless you tell me the shtachavo is the shtachavo of Hidah, maybe, but that converts the whole mikveh bikurim. We don't even know the shtachavo is part of the mikveh bikurim into Hidah. So we have no clue what happened. The interesting thing is, in the Afsadigoin, just to point out what he did an amazing thing. It says, V'achas esrei, this is in Perek Aleph, Amud 14. V'achas esrei, lohides loi ala tov asher nosan loch, v'zeis kagoi mikveh bikurim, she'omar bo v'omar te'elov. What does it mean? V'zeis kagoi mikveh bikurim. What's kagoi? Kagoi means you logically have other options, but this is one of the examples. But there are other examples. And he quotes the pasuk, V'shara Parsha. So this is Chala, and this is certainly Sabato and Turbis L'Hoides, and I think it's correct, because Ala Teva Asher Nosan Loch, that L'Chera is a Hidah. Since you're murder on Teva, you're not Mishabech. I don't know. Mishabech is, you could do it, but it's a little more difficult. Now, when he says Kagoi Mikveh Bikurim, maybe it's not only Bikurim, but maybe it's also Birchas Hamazon. Rav Sadigoin does not have a mitzvah minyan, a mitzvah called Birchas Hamazon. And the Lashon, Asher Nosan Loch, is very interesting over here. And maybe that's what he's trying to do is that Mikveh Bikurim is a binyan av for any chesed that the Rebbeinu Shalom does for you. You should be moidelo yis'al akol chasadov kagain mikveh bikurim. And Birchas Hamazon is another example of that. That's what I would assume, but I can't say for sure. Now, this was easy compared to the next line. The next line is the next line a priori is impossible. Ulevakesh mimenu lahasmid habracha, and the bracha is in the original Judeo-Arabic, not the hey idea. It's al bracha. Okay. So here, I must say that I'm completely confused. The Chinuch also does the same thing. Sefer Chinuch, Simen and Mitzvah Tofresh Vov, V'acha Shebach. I assume that he had a betibur or something like that. Mevakesh Milefonov lahasmid habrocha olav. Umitechis eiris nafshay b'shevach Hashem u'b'tuvay zeiche u'mizboreches artzei. So, it's very nice for drasha But, in plain Yiddish, wo steht das in the Parsha? Where is this seems to be Reisi ben Padish, Reisi v'dosh, Moshe b'yagvur? Where is this coming from? You do find such a tefillah, but at the end of Vidi Maisa, Hashkifu Memon Kochcho Min Hashamayim, V'oiches Amcha Yisrael, V'esadom Asher Nosat Alonu, Kasher Nishbat Alav Useinu, Eretz Avos Cholod Vosh. Okay? So, I saw Achreinim will say, there's a Tanchuma in Parshat Kisavod. In the Vasha edition, it's in Siman Aleph. Elo yored Adam l'tich sadeu, ro'o eshkol shabiker, teina shabikra, rimon shabiker, manichoy besal, v'holich Yerushalayim, uvo v'oimed b'emso azor, u'mevakesh rachmim al atzmoy, v'al Yisrael, ועל ארץ ישראל, שנאמר, השקיף ומעון קודשך. This is Mama Shapella. Kilo is quoting השקיף ומעון קודשך, goes on bikurim. So, l'chir is the whole portion. This is not Pshuta Shel Mikra. And mitzvahs go according to Pshuta Shel Mikra as Gufa Dekor, as you see in Sherish Beis, Lo Yisaseh Mem Hey, Lo Yisaseh Kuf Samach Hey, in other places, okay? The Rambam is mefurish in Mishnah Torah that Hashkif Ma'on Kodshecha is part of the Mitzvahs Vidui Maisres. Look in Hilchos Ma'aseh Sheni Me'et Ravoy, Perek Yud Aleph Halacha Tezayin, Hashkif Ma'on Kodshecha Min HaShamayim, Ad Kasher Nishbato Lavuseinu Eretz Avos Chol Devosh, Zu Bakosh Shi'itei Tam B'Peres. Pirush HaMishnah, Ma'aseh Sheni, Perek Hey, Mishnah Yud Gimel, the Rambam, Shetitei Tam B'Peres, what's a loy Shiur, Shmeinim, Arevim B'Taimom, V'drash Zeh Shedosh Pasha Zu, Mila B'Mila, Ein HaKavon Sho'im Ekein, B'Shas Havidui, Elo Hishmionu came B'derech Drash, Kol Inyonim Shekolos B'Parsha Zu. Parsha Zu, which is the Parsha of Vidui Maisa. B'Shas Kriya, Eino Kiri Elo Nusach HaMikra, K'mo Shekosav, V'zeh Poshet Me'ed. And I assume it's the same things going on in Bikurim. So I have no idea what this is. I saw one of the Achreinim, the Kli Chemda. Okay. See, he says that the Pshat in the Rambam is it's Hishtachavo, and there's no Hishtachavo without Tefillah. And somehow the Rebbeinu Shalom is Megala to him that this Tefillah is Asmodes HaBrocha. I don't know how he knew that. I guess that's in Hishtachavo. Chesed. Das sagt er. Pash the Rambam, it's a Pash Nishtachavo. And you could have imagined Nishtachavo of Hidah. The Rambam in Ilchos Bikurim, Per Gimel Chiyud Beis, Vakoy Maniach Yodai, Tachtav Meinif, V'koy Ha'ami Yeraviovi, V'yev Mitzrayim, Ad Shegoy Mekol HaPasha, Menichoy B'tzad HaMizbech, V'keren Droimis Ma'rovis, V'droimis Shel Keren, V'yishtachel V'yetze. That's a tefillah. I don't know. That's not, that's not the way I was taught to be the Rambam. Maybe and this idea that he's working with, whether it's a magus or whatever it is, there's no ishtachavo without tefillah. I never saw this in the Rambam. And and even if it's true that the content of tefillah is hasmolas habrocha, I can't say that I understand that. Okay? Now, Here, we're not clear what the mitzvah is, whether it's the shapcha or the hidesloi. In Minyan HaMitzvah Kotzer and in the Protei Mitzvahs at the beginning of Hilchos Bikurim, it's Mikra Bikurim, which doesn't give you a clue about anything. It's just you're saying something. It doesn't tell you what the content of what you're saying is. However, what's interesting in Mishnah Torah proper, the Ram says the mitzvah is lehizvados. And you understand yourself, this lehizvados is not the vidui dvorim of chet. Because there's nothing here that would be like that. In Perek Gilul Hilchos Bikurim Halacha Yud, Mitzvas Aseh lehizvados b'mikdash ala bikurim b'shor shemeviim maschil v'koirei higarti hayoim l'Hashem Elokecho ki vosi el haaretz v'goyim arami v'ro v'kol ha'parshas ata. So it's lehizvados. And then, if you think this might be a quirk, look in Perek Dalet of Hilchos Bikurim Halacha Aleph. Kol hamevi bikurim ton korban v'shir u'tenufa lina v'lina aval havidui eino shova bakol lefi sheyesh shechayavim lahavi bikurim v'einon koyim aleim. So l'chayr, it's very clear that the vidui is the kriya. Let's just go slow. The idea of vidui by Bikurim was not the Rambam's discovery. It's a Mishnah. The Mishnah Bikurim, it's also quoted in the Gemara Yevomis, the Mishnah Bikurim, Perek Beis, Mishnah Beis, in Orel, Yesh b'ma'aseh u'bikurim ma she'en kein b'truma, she'hama'aseh v'bikurim tunin havos mokum u'tunin vidui. So Rashi Yevomis, Ein Gimel Amud Aleph u'tunin vidui, bi'at HaKodesh min habayis, that's referring to the vidui of Meiser. And then he says in Hey Vesi es Reishis Bikurim, which is Mikra Bikurim. And it was also foolish that that's what he's referring to. Now, it is true that the Rambam Pirush HaMishnah interprets Tun and Vidui by Bikurim in a different way. You open up the Mishnah in Bikurim, there, the Rambam Pirush HaMishnah, V'omru b'hem utun and Vidui, fa'kodem lon Meseches Ma'aseh Sheni, shu mizvade gam al Truma. When he's in Vidui Ma'aseh, there's also Vidui on Truma. It's not talking about the mitzvah of Mikra Bikurim. It's talking about what the content of Vidui Ma'aseh is. V'hu amram v'nasata la'levi zu truma u'trumas Ma'aseh u'kfat tirtzu kushizu b'talmud mitztalmud Eretz Yisrael v'amru she'inyan dover zeh she'im loy hoyeloi el bikurim bilvad o Ma'aseh sheni bilvad chaye bevidui. So this Mishnah, the word vidui here, has nothing to do with the mitzvah of Mikra Bikurim. It's just dinim and vidui Ma'aseh. Avol im loy hoyeloi el truma eno chaye bevidui. If you're looking into discussion how the Rambam Mishnah Torah doesn't quote the Pirush Mishnah for some reason, I don't get it. There's a Rikukis and Bikurim Per Gimel Aloha Hey and Hukas Mazasheni at the Lavoy Per Giraf Aloha Yadali. Look through if you like, but all I would tell you, if the Rambam is very clear in Per Dalid Halacha Aleph that the Vidui is the clear, so I would assume that he's interpreting Mishnah Torah like Rashi in the Ritva. Okay, I don't think it's an avla that he. And I would assume the word vidui over here is not confession. The word vidui is declaration. And he's declaring something. He's either declaring something about the Maislis, that's vidui Maislis, he's declaring something that of the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu he has given us. And that's the word lisvades, I would assume. Now, it says next, Kishiyovi Abikurim. So Yovi is really a time constraint when he's bringing the Bikurim. It's the time that he's chayiv in this mitzvah called Mikra Bikurim. It's not necessarily the Mikra Bikurim is on the Bikurim. It's just a time constraint when he recites the Mikra Bikurim. However, in Hilchos Bikurim, in Perek Gimel Ochayud, he says, Mitzvas Aseh lizvag ze mikdosh ala Bikurim, b'shah shemevim. Okay? It's a little different spin, but that's what it is. Okay. Okay. Now, here's where things get difficult. Let's just read a little bit more, and then we'll start talking about the problem. Let's just finish it. Then it says, "Vu amoy kishav bikurim vu amoy yisale v'anisa v'amarta lefnei Hashem Elokecha agami yeviravi," and I guess it should be like v'chulei. Okay. Uma shebo achazeh, because he's saying uma shebo achazeh mehal parsha kula. Here, it doesn't mean kula, because L'chori stops before V'nachtoi, and the Ram does the same thing in Hilchos Chometz Matzah, where he discusses V'hu shederish, V'hu sheyidrish, kula, kula pasha kula, and there it also doesn't mean kula. I don't know why by kula he keeps on talking about bikurim, the pasha bikula, but L'chori it doesn't mean kula. Now, Vayizbar mishpatei mitzvazu mishpateha miseches bikur perek hashvi'i miseita ve'en anosh chayeves bo, because they is yesh mevin ve'en kol. Okay. Now, this is nothing compared to the next problem. Okay. I mean, okay, I don't know. You know, he quotes something which doesn't exist. That probably is a little difficult. Das modus bracha. But in the question what l'shabchoi means, okay, what's l'hoiles? I'm a simpleton. I just want to know one simple thing, okay? The question is, let's start like this. If I, let's start like that. If I would have been writing Sefer Mitzvos, okay, I would have said, Bikurim is not a separate mitzvah. Mikra Bikurim is not a separate mitzvah. But the same way the Rambam has a mitzvah of Maisa Oila, and the whole Seid of Oila is included. And there's a mitzvah of Maisa Chatos, and the whole Seid of Chatos included. And there's a mitzvah of Maisa Osham, and the whole Seid of Osham is included. And there's a mitzvah of Maisa Zevach HaShlomim, and everything is included. And there's a mitzvah of Menochos, and everything is included. And in Shirish Yud Beis, he basically says that chalitza is also like that. And there's also a mikra in chalitza. You say something, and it's all the same mitzvah. Some people are not chayiv in mikra. No. So that should be a reason why it's a separate mitzvah, mitzvahs. And the Rambam, it's almost like a given. And I just want to show you something before we get started, just to give you an idea of what happened over here. The Rambam is going out of his way to separate Mikra Bikurim from the Mitzvah Avos Bikurim. I would have only say from Mitzvah, decided it's two mitzvahs. I just did the Mitzvah from Avos Bikurim, or Hafrosh and Avos Bikurim. There's a Mitzvah Mikra Bikurim. Okay? He writes there's a mitzvah of Hafrosha and Avos Bikurim. Then Maisa Rishon, Maisa Sheni, Trumas Maisa Oni, then Vidui Maisa, and then Mikra Bikurim. Almost to say, Rabbi Sai, these two things have nothing to do with each other. You see, I'll tell you something. Vidui Maisa is really the culmination of Mitzvahs Maisas. All the Matanos, he's saying that he fulfilled the Mitzvahs K'mitzvasan. So he writes all the Mitzvahs of Matanos, Avor, Afrosh, or whatever it is, and the culmination is Vidui Maisa. And then is Mikra Bikurim. I just want to tell you before, maybe I'll get to it tonight. I'm not sure if I'll get to this part tonight. We'll see exactly what we'll get to. But there's a simple way of doing it, but I think it's wrong, okay? Could have said the Torah, see, we have a paradigm in Mitzvah Kuf Yud Zayin that the Ram says there are 4 mitzvah erchen. He says, you say it's one mitzvah. So he says, since there are different parshas with different dinim, so we may like count them as different mitzvahs. Okay? So I could have said there's a parsha of Afroshas Bikurim and Havola Mikdash in Mishpatim Kisisa. Reish Bikurim Moscha Tovi Beis Hashem Elokecha. Twice. And it calls the Bikurim and it talks about Havola Mikdash. Then there's a separate parsha in Kisavoy that talks about Reishis Pri Adomo. It doesn't call it Bikurim. And with the whole Seder of Mikra Bikurim, etc., etc. So the question is this a parsha of Kefer La Shlomas Hadinim? Or basically it's a separate parsha, 2 separate mitzvahs? So I think and it's separate dinim, you could say. And it's the paradigm of Kuf Yud Zayin. I think this is a mistake. And maybe I don't want to belabor the point, but the Rambam clearly in Hilchos Bikurim in Perek Gimel, he talks about the tenet. And before Halacha Yud, before he mentions the mitzvah Mikra Bikurim, and l'chayra the tenet is a didin havor. In fact, the Rambam says very clearly that the tenet is matnas kuna. The tenet goes to Pashat Koch. You don't have to give the Bikurim, you give the tenet also. If the whole purpose of the parsha of Bikurim is to tell us a new idea, a separate mitzvah of Mikra Bikurim, tenet should have been only the din of Mikra Bikurim. It has nothing to do with this. So I don't think it's an approach. I think what the Rambam is doing is the Rambam's opinion is, and that he clearly states at the end of Shiur Aleph, that the kvias of mitzvahs, a separate mitzvah Torah, depend upon Inyonei Torah. That's very clear in Rambam. Okay. And l'cheira, you're going to have to come to a conclusion in Rambam that the inyan of abikuim, of avoah lemikdosh, and afrosh and avoah lemikdosh, and mikvah bikuim is a separate inyan from Inyonei Torah. Okay. And what you're going to want to say, is that it's a separate mitzvah of Shevach Vaidot HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then you could say that Bikurim in Chefsa tone this and tone that and tone this. But Mikla Bikurim, it's not on the Bikurim, it's only B'shas Bikurim and the holy, and it's a mitzvah of Shevach Vaidot HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This certainly has great possibilities. The problem is the Sheva V'Hido in Rambam is you're not convinced what it is and where it is and what he's talking about. And that's the kivei of the mitzvah becomes a little strange because you have to understand this in backdrop of the whole discussion we had before. It is true. I think that is the way the Rambam interprets it. The Ramban interprets the Rambam. Because the Ramban has mitzvah tesvov sheshoch rav, the mitzvah of Birkas HaTorah, and he goes like this. Shenistavini nevinu lohides lishmo yis'aleh b'chol eish shenika b'Torah al teva gedela she'osa lonu b'sitoi torasoi elenu it v'hodianu hamaasim utzuim. It's a hidah. And then he says at the end, he says like this. He says, mitzvah achas im akriya kmo shemikra bikurim eno nimna achas im avo'ason v'sipi tziyas Yisrael im achilas haPesach. Now, I just want to focus on sipi tziyas Yisrael and achilas haPesach. See, according to the Ramban, CBC Yisrael and Achilas HaPesach is two mitzvahs because of the klal, the second klal, which the Ramban really has, he's formulated, and he formulates it at the end of Yud Aleph and probably Beis, that wherever mitzvah not makvin zu is zu, and they're separate ma'asim, so they're separate mitzvahs. So I could have assumed the same way Tomet Shach and Tomet Ben Abayim are two mitzvahs. I could have assumed that Haggadah and Achilas HaPesach are two separate mitzvahs for the same reason. But then it's a very poor argument for Kriyas HaTorah and Mikvah Bikurim, because you don't have a Makvin Zeh. You can't have Mikvah Bikurim without Avos Bikurim. You can't have Birkas HaTorah without learning Torah. So I would have said that the Ramban's argument is in the Rambam's frame of reference. He's asking why the Rambam's Shoch Halav. Whenever you have a mitzvah, and the mitzvah requires shevach v'idor HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the shevach v'idor and the mitzvah are two separate things, two separate mitzvahs. Mikah havos bikurim, mikah bikurim v'avoson. Al hateva, that's why he stresses. It's not stam to say bichas hatera. It's al hateva shenosam lono es hatera, the chesed. That's the way he stresses the whole drasha. Lohidus l'shvoyis ala b'chol eish shenikom hatera al hateva hagedol shenosam b'sita terosai. Elena v'diono ha'maasim v'tzuyim lefonam shebehen ninchal chayolam habo. That is the paradigm, and he's saying you find this in the Rambam in two other places. And he's learning in the Rambam, the mitzvah from the Bikurim is a separate mitzvah because we have a mitzvah which is Mechayim, Halil, and Oidah. It's two separate mitzvahs. And that two separate in Yonei HaTorah. I could have interpreted it differently, but he's using, the Rambam accepts that, so the same way it should be over here. That's what I assume the Ramban's doing. That, I think, is the general rule, I think, in the Rambam. I just want to point out that it is true that it's not two separate parashas, and therefore it's two separate mitzvahs. However, I think the Rambam interprets that there are two layers in the parasha of Kisavai. There's, in certain sense, there's a hashlomo, that there are dinim of teneh, which are part of havor, and there's also a separate mitzvah. Because it's a very interesting thing in Rambam. The din that it's part of the havor bikurim is in Perek Gimel, halacha zayin and ches. Habikurim tunin kli, v'samt zatenu, mitzvah namufcho, and then he says matnas kun. Okay? That's before he mentioned mitzvah mikra bikurim. Well, he's still talking about mitzvah havor bikurim. Then, however, he goes like this: Perek Gimel, halacha yud and yud beis. Mitzvas Aseh l'zvadis b'mikdash al bikurim b'shosh mevin mascho v'kori higad te'il Hashem Elokecho kivosi el haaretz arami oivirovi v'chule hamevi es bikurim yesh lo rishus litnam le'avdoi u'kroivoi b'chol haderech ad shemagil lahar habayis. I would have written this halacha before when he's discussing Navos Bikurim with the tenor. You get the impression that as a prelude, a part of Mikra Bikurim, there's a din Havor Ba'atzmai, and you could use an Eved also allowed. Higia Lahar Habayis, Noitel Hasal Al Ksefot, Hu Ba'atzmai. That's not part of Mitzvah Havos Bikurim. That goes to the Mikra Bikurim that he himself takes the Ba'atzmai. Umoid Hasal Me'al Ksefot, V'yoich Ze B'svosot, V'akein Manicha Yodei Tachto, V'meinif B'kei Amen Ovi. Again, no come on the Mitzvah Aramei Ovi. It's the Chal Hashem or the Teneh, and the Havor is a din in the Mitzvah Mikra Bikurim. Ad Shigei Mekol HaParsha, U'manicha B'tzad HaMizbeach, V'chulei. U'minayin Shein Tunin, Tenufa, Shenema, V'lo Chakoyin Atenem Miyot, L'Rabes Bikum Tenufa, Kshem Shetunin Tenufa, Kach Tunin Korban, Shlomim, V'shir, Shenema, Bohen V'samach B'chol HaTev. Now, it's a very strange thing. Even though I'm trying to say there's a separate kiyum of Shiur and Tnufa and Korban in Mikra Bikurim. However, the Rambam very clearly in Perek Dal Halacha Aleph says, Kol HaMevi Bikurim Tom Korban V'Shir U'Tnufa Lino Avol Havidui Eino Shove Bakol Lefi Sheyesh Achiyavim Lahavi Bikurim V'Ein Korin Aleim. So then, if that's correct, but it's a very odd thing, there are basically two dinim in the Tnufa and in not only in the Tnufa, but in the Shiur and the Korban, that is a din in the Mikvah Bikurim, and the Sal, the Sefer, and there's another din in the Etzem Havot, which is an amazing thing. And that's the Ram goes out of his way to say that it's not Ma'akev, because you could have imagined that it all goes together with the Havot, with the din Mikvah Bikurim. Okay, now, okay. Ramban, what I mentioned before, that it's clear in Ramban, the Ramban, first of all, talks about the mitzvahs, which are the purpose of remembering. When he talks about mezuzah, you know how it calls him avad shehide shechesed abore godol me'ed al eisei ritzenu sheitzionu me'eisei avdus lecheres v'chova godol l'schus avis zakis achvusechem hachfeitzim b'yirshmo. So there's a chesed in Yitzias Mitzrayim, and I assume that's what God is about, even though it doesn't say it explicitly. And the Ramban clearly in Kisavoy, when he says what's the word Haggadah, Higadati Hayoim Bepri Hazeh, the Pri is speaking. Higadati, and it's speaking and it's saying Shevel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He goes like this in Ramban. He says, Higadati Hayoim Bepri Hazeh Shevesi Garti Voidesi Lashem Elokecho Sheviani Laeretz Ashedish Bal V'Seinu Losais Lono V'Ne Hashem Mekayim Dvorov V'Ani Moide U'Meshabech Lishmo. It's both. Moide U'Meshabech Lishmo. So the Ramban has it, and that's what I would assume what's going on in the Mitzvah Shacharav, that he has this paradigm of a mitzvah where there's an element of Sheva Vodah, a separate Sheva Vodah, and the mitzvah itself, both the Mikvah Bikurim and Korban Pesach, and the separate mitzvahs, and the same way, Birchas HaTeirah, which Chesa is a Hidol Hashem Yis'aleh, Al HaTeva, which is Teirah, also is a separate mitzvah from Limud Torah. But this is the Rambam. The amazing thing in the Rambam is not that this might be true or whatever it is, but the omission. There's a new rule without any proof from Matiki Ashmur that this is a separate mitzvah minyan mitzvahs. No proof. What? That since Noshim Apota from Mikvah Bikurim and the Chayim and Avos Apur, it's Raidach, the two separate mitzvahs. You can't have chalokim of the mitzvah that Noshim Aptuais. The Rambam has not shown the necessity to prove that it's two separate mitzvahs. No problem. L'chayra, this, what bothers me is a stark contrast to what he's doing in Shiur Yud Beis. So I could imagine, I could explain why he might do it, but there's no clear precedent for it. And without saying anything, like here it is. And the amazing thing is the Ramban, the Masik, instead of jumping on the Ram, saying Mehechetese, Adarabah, let's use this and flip it on you and say, so why is it a separate mitzvah of because of Torah? I'm sorry I took the whole time, but this I thought was an amazing thing. Mitzvah will pick up next week with Challah and Mitzvah Shem Shvius. Have a nice week.